So anterior shoulder, so basically everything that happens on the front side, really front and top, okay? So the one unique thing, if you didn't talk or didn't watch the video that I put on LMS, go through because you can actually see it anatomically laid out. But if you feel that little point right in the front of your throat, the little bumps that are on the side, that's your sternoclavicular joint. That is the only thing that attaches bone to bone everything in your shoulder, okay? So if you talk about shoulder dislocation, shoulder injuries, it's the most common injury that you get is shoulder injuries. So when we look at training the shoulder, we need to take into account that it is very, very complex. It's basically just held together by tendons, ligaments, and muscle. So, but the nice thing is it can do all kinds of crazy different things and move through tons of ranges of motion. That's why Josh can probably like sit there and take his arm and just go all the way back and like, you know, set it on. No, you don't have great external rotation? No boy. What's your top throw, 85?
86, 87.
86, 87. Bet you we fix it, we throw like 93. It's great. Okay? So when we look at anterior shoulder, what we're really going to look at is well, we're going to go movements here first, just so it helps explain. Because when we talk about the shoulder, we talked about like flexion, extension, rotation at the core. When we look at the shoulder, it kind of goes backwards a little bit. So when we look at flexion of the shoulder, what we're really looking at is up in front. So a lot of times when we look at, you know, if you think extension of your core, you think opening up, you would think this is extension. This is actually flexion, okay? When we look at the other side, obviously then this comes back. This is extension. We have one new one because we don't bend necessarily at our shoulder, so we have abduction. A lot of people just flat out say abduction just because it's easier, because then you have adduction. So when we look at abduction and adduction, we're basically looking at the midline of your body, so you can just draw straight down the center of your body. Abduction is basically subtracting from the midline. Adduction is adding to it. So you're basically just trying to close that off. All right? And then the last thing, when we talk about rotation, what we're really talking about is your humerus right here. So we talk about rotation of the shoulder. We have internal rotation of your humerus, external rotation. The tough thing with the shoulder is that we can do all of these movements, and there's one more when we really talk about your shoulder and your shoulder blade. Basically, we have shoulder blade protraction, retraction, elevation, and then suppression. Okay, so you got 4 movements of your shoulder blade. So all of a sudden we start to see that there's a ton of different things going on in the shoulder. That's why we've broken it down into 2 weeks. All right, so when we look at all the different movements, the tough thing with the shoulder is that all of them happen at the same time. So I can sit there and flex and externally rotate my shoulder, or internally rotate my shoulder, right? That's where it gets tricky, because all of a sudden you start to think all the different movements, all right? If we sit there, if Josh were to go through, come here real quick, right? I want you to just like, almost like get into that back end of like a throw, like you're about to pitch, right? So he gets into here, what's happening is that his shoulder blade is retracted, his humerus is externally rotated, and even then we get down to his hand, we'll talk about their like forearms and his arms, because his forearm is pronated, okay? That all happens all in one thing, okay? So when we look at all the different motions of the shoulder, we have to look at the muscles and how do we train and use exercises to strengthen the different ranges of our shoulder. So the first thing we're going to look at is super simple, the pecs, right? Because they're everything. Like Ahmad can sit there and Ahmad can like just touch his pecs like he's doing right now. Yeah, all right? There's 2 different pec muscles. You have your pec major, which is the one that everybody sees. Have you ever seen it like where somebody's got like the weird like ripples down like the center of their chest? Yes? Okay. So that's basically the insertion or the origin of your pec major. So it comes from your sternum and it comes out to the outside of your shoulder. So when we look at 2 of the main things, because we're going to talk about pec major, which protracts your shoulder a little bit, and then internally rotates your humerus. Then you have your pec minor, which attaches to the inside because your shoulder blade literally has like this little hook on the top end. So if it sits on the back of your spine. It comes up to that acromion process and pulls that shoulder forward into protraction, okay? So when we look at all the anterior stuff, we're going to start with the pec major and pec minor, because they are probably the two that people conflate the most as to what they do and then what exercises actually train them, okay? Because they have two different what we call lines of pull. So you see all the little ripples and you see somebody that's like really lean, or you see like a bodybuilder and they flex and you see striations. It really looks like lines, like somebody took a comb, like scraped across their chest. That's where the muscle fibers all line up to reach out to that humerus. So when we look at the actions that it does, the pulling motion and where it pulls from then dictates what movements we're going to do with it, okay? Your pec minor really pulls that shoulder blade forward. So does your subscap, which is down here. We'll talk about that after we talk about push-ups. What that pec minor does is that actually does, so if you do like dumbbell bench press, which we're going to go over today, if you do a regular bench press, which we'll actually go over later in the semester when we talk about like a lot of our barbell and compound lifts, that motion, that pec minor actually does a lot of that movement, okay? So, Ahmad, come on out here for me. Ahmad's going to help me demonstrate push-ups. We're going to start real simple, right? So, the big thing we have to think about with push-ups, go ahead and go down. So, we talked about plank, we talked about a nice hollow body. So, in this tall position right here, when we look at the shoulder, Ahmad, go ahead and just do a regular push-up and just hold the bottom. Bring your like chest to the floor and everything. Chest to the floor. Just go, just relax, okay? When we look at this position right here, we go to look at where the pec is lined up. Now Ahmad's real close right here. So one of the things, if Ahmad's really like locked in this position, he's getting shoulder extension because his shoulder blade's coming back. He's got basically a neutral arm, but he's a little externally rotated at this humerus. And really, he's kind of dipping up a little bit into scapular elevation here, okay? So if we can get Ahmad to pull his shoulder blades back, what this does is this creates tension, because when he pulls it back, he stretches out the pec minor, and then he can push up. And now all of a sudden he's got that pec minor that's stabilizing that shoulder. Everything on the backside, this like the complex of the shoulder gets really, really funky with everything. So now he's able to target that pec minor just a little bit more. Go back down. The tough thing you'll see with push-ups, okay, and this is why we're going to go through all of this, a lot of people like to do push-ups either all the way out, like this, which would really target your pec major a little bit more, or they like to do this, and they do these push-ups so they like bring the elbows super tucked in, okay? The problem that we get with this is that when he goes to push up, he's now got his pec major super stretched out, and then when he goes to try to push up, he's just going to create this motion, and it's going to loosen up his rotator cuff, which we're going to tackle more next week because it's like the most injury-prone thing. Everybody hears about like rotator cuff. If you say rotator cuff, I'm probably going to slap you, okay? Just because it makes no sense to have a rotator cuff. So come back up in a regular push-up, bring your hands back in, okay? Pushing up. Here, so stand up real quick. All right. Everything makes sense there. So here's what I want us to think about. This is the last little thing on that push-up, because we talked about that extension of the shoulder. So just bring your shoulder blade back when you're doing a push-up. So right here, we notice Ahmad, it's nice and flat here on the front of the chest. If Ahmad brings his shoulder blade up and forward, we start to get this ball right here, okay? So when his shoulder blade comes up and elevates and protracts forward, what Ahmad's doing is he's putting his deltoid in this really weird position, and as he goes down, all the force of gravity is pulling his humerus up into the backside of his deltoid, and it starts to just rub it raw on the inside, right? So when you hear people say my shoulders hurt from doing push-ups all the time, or they hurt from doing dumbbell bench press all the time, this is why. Because they go through this motion, and they do it where their shoulder blade shrugged up into their ears and it tips forward. So he's going to pull that shoulder blade back and down, and all of a sudden you'll see it flatten out. Okay? Anybody got any questions on that? Great. We can turn that off because everybody's spread out.